All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's budget hearing for the Public Safety and Administrative Subcommittee. For the record, I'm Delegate Jazz Lewis. Today, we have an incredibly packed schedule with a wide array of departments joining us, covering many areas. First up on the agenda would be the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, which is tasked with educating the public about our great history here in Maryland. They are rather new as an independent agency, but I know we look forward to hearing about the work that they're doing to understanding our rich history for African Americans in our state. We're also joined by the Maryland Department of Veteran Affairs, charged with ensuring that every Maryland family and their family receives the services that our veterans are entitled to. I know that we look forward to hearing from Secretary Woods, who's also a constituent of mine, about his work to serve our veterans and their families better. After Secretary Woods, we'll be joined by Secretary Chaudhry with the Department of General Services, which is charged with maintaining and operating state facilities on behalf of state agencies throughout Maryland's government, as well as most procurement matters. And finally, we'll be joined by the Workers' Compensation Commission, which is tasked with administering our state's workforce compensation law. Lastly, we will be hearing from the Department of Juvenile Services. I know the subcommittee is looking forward to hearing from Secretary Schiraldi about his department's work. As my fellow subcommittee members and I have a number of questions about the department as it seeks to manage and supervise those youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system, especially as we consider juvenile justice reform this legislative session. It is of most importance that we ensure that DJS is prepared with the appropriate resources to serve these minors, keep them in quality care, not just for public safety, but to rehabilitate these youth who are at risk. Today is a busy day, so I want to make sure that we thank our Department of Legislative Service analysts in advance for all of their hard work and for today's presenters from all across state's government. With that, we will begin with the analysis by Ms. Ray for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the members of the committee. I'm Yashodhara Rai, the DLS analyst for Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. Chapters 451 and 452 of 2022 established the commission as an independent unit within the executive branch. This is the first year for its independent analysis. Prior to this, the commission's budget was included in the Boards, Commissions, and Offices unit of the executive branch. The commission's aim is to educate both the Maryland citizens and visitors about the importance of the African American history in the state by discovering, documenting, preserving, and endorsing Maryland's African American heritage. The commission also oversees the operation of the Banneker Douglas Museum, Maryland's official state museum on African American history and culture. As shown here on page 1, the budget for the commission increases by approximately $22,000 for fiscal 25 allowance. Chapters 451 and 452 require that the governor include $1.6 million for the commission in the annual budget bill. This has increased the commission's budget from approximately $834,000 in fiscal 23 to $1.6 million in fiscal 24 working appropriation and fiscal 25 allowance. On page 2, I wanted to highlight the African American Heritage Preservation Program grants that is being administered by the commission with the Maryland Historical Trust. This program aims to identify and preserve historical and cultural sites of the African American heritage. It is a $5 million annual grant, which recently awarded 24 recipients, including Maryland's nonprofit organizations and one state agency on January 19th of this year. Although this program is being administered by the commission, it is not included in its budget. Funding for this program is included in the capital budget appropriation for the Department of Planning. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows that 83% of the fiscal 25 allowance supports personnel, which includes 11 regular positions, and the remaining funding reflects operational expenses for the museum. Exhibit 2 on pages 4 and 5 presents the proposed budget change. The largest change in fiscal 25 allowance is driven by the net change in personnel due to the conversion of 2 contractual full-time equivalent positions to regular positions. I would also like to point out that the fiscal 25 statewide salary adjustments, including the new positions, are centrally budgeted in the statewide account in the Department of Budget and Management, DBM, and are generally not included in the agency's budget. but there has been a technical error for the commission and a recommended action is provided, which will be discussed later in the presentation. Moving on to personnel data on page 5. The fiscal 25 allowance includes 2 contractual conversions. One position is for research and preservation specialist position that drafts and coordinates the African American Heritage Preservation Program grant agreements. And the other position is an agency grant specialist who supports and assists in writing and researching grants for the grantees. And there are 4 vacant positions as of December 31st, 2023. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the visitors' engagement with the Banneker Douglas Museum from fiscal 2019 to 2023. Starting fiscal 2020, the engagement includes in-person and online visitors, mostly the website visitors. And beginning fiscal 22, the engagement data is reported as in-person and online visitors, including various online platforms like the Commission's website, museum's website, and social media. This has increased the engagement count by approximately 100,000 visitors from 2020, when the online visitors were only website visitors, to fiscal 22, when all online platforms were included. The engagement count has decreased by approximately 8,000 visitors in fiscal 23 compared to fiscal 22. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the breakdown of these online platform visitor counts that started in fiscal 22. The blue bars are the visitor counts for fiscal 22 and the red bars are for fiscal 23. As you can see, the highest engagement counts are through Facebook. Exhibit 5 on page 8 shows the various events attended by the commissioners in each fiscal year from 2019 to 23, including festivals, meetings, and similar events. Although this has more than doubled from 134 in fiscal 22 to 276 in fiscal 23, this measure has yet to return to the pre-pandemic level of 465 events attended in fiscal 2020. We request the Commission to comment on how operations have changed since becoming an independent agency and plans for continued expansion and engagement with the community. We also request the Commission to comment on how events attended by the commissioners impact the museum's operations, expansion, and engagement with the community. DLS's recommended action is on page 9. As mentioned earlier, the Commission's budget includes health insurance costs for new positions, which has been double budgeted in the fiscal 25 budget, and DLS recommends reducing this funding to the amount of approximately $29,000 as a technical correction. This concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation there. Colleagues, any questions for our analysts? Seeing none, I'd like to invite Chanel Compton, the Executive Director for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. Thank you. And whenever you're ready.
Here. Greetings, Delegate Ivy, members of the committee. My name is Chanel Johnson, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. And in response to the question concerning how has the commission thrived as we were legislated as an independent state agency is the following. The Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture has improved in its operation of the Banneker Douglas Museum and co-administration of the African American Heritage Preservation Grant. The following is an outline of administrative and programmatic improvements. 1, finance and fiscal management. The Commission has hired a full-time chief financial officer to work directly with myself, the executive director, and the commission to manage the commission's budget, refine financial procedures, pay bills, assist with grants management, and manage vendors and capital repair expenditures. Quite frankly, having a CFO focused solely on the commission's operational and capital budget and finances has made our programming, administration, capital work, and operations more efficient and effective. 2, museum exhibitions, youth and public programs. The independent status has ensured that all of our work is solely aligned with our mission and national standards of museum operations. The museum's collections, research, exhibitions, and programs are aligned with the American Alliance of Museums core standards, the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History's annual themes, and the Association of African-American Museums annual priorities. 3, management. The commission has a dedicated board of commissioners tasked with governing the Banneker Douglas Museum and supporting the African-American Heritage Preservation Grant Program. As such, there is a clear line of authority communication with staff and commissioners. Commission leadership works closely with the executive director to support and evaluate her work and development. In addition, the commission has a stronger connection with the governor's office as the commission chair, vice chair, and executive director meets with their office bi-weekly to discuss commission updates and community needs. Thank you.
No, thank you, quite frankly, for the work that you've been doing. Colleagues, do we have questions for the executive director, Delegate McComas?
They say that all politics is local. So I just found out that there may be an issue in Harford County where a private nonprofit may have discovered a Black cemetery. And I was wondering if you all would have contacts that I could forward to these folks, because they want to make sure that it is properly preserved and dedicated, and if there's a way they can find out who's there, you know,
Yeah.
if you have some contacts, that would be great, and you could forward to me.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, beg my indulgence, but I thought, hey, I'm going to take advantage of this.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Delegate. Are there any other questions? I've got one. I know that you all just changed to becoming an independent agency. So how has that really affected the work that you've been doing?
I mean, it's been tremendous. We are operating our fiscal budget. We're able to prioritize without having, the bureaucratic oversight of another agency that, quite frankly, their priorities are spread to other commissions and other things. So having our commission fully invested in the operations of the commission by way of the governor's appointments to the commission has been phenomenal. I really can't express enough how amazing and transformative it has been since our state independent status.
It's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Glad that everything's going well for you.
Very
I
well.
appreciate you showing up. And so I again appreciate the work that you've been doing. However we can be helpful, we're always looking to do just that.
Thank you.
So that will end the hearing here with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. We're going to move over to the Department of Veteran Affairs. Ms. Rye, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'll be presenting the analysis for the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs, or MDVA. The graph on page 1 shows that the budget for MDVA has increased by $8.2 million in fiscal 25. Turning to page 2, 4 proposed deficiency appropriations totaling approximately $6.5 million is included in fiscal 25 budget. It includes $4.4 million in special funds, which includes $1.8 million from interment fees for eligible dependents on the veterans in the cemetery program, $1.1 million in gifts for Charlotte Hall Veterans Home, $1.6 million available from Batley's Fund for Charlotte Hall Veterans Home repairs and maintenance from previous contractor, and approximately $14,000 in service animal program. $2.1 million in federal funds for equipment in the cemetery program and Charlotte Hall facility upgrades and repairs. And the 4th proposed deficiency is $270,000 in special funds from interment fees for eligible dependents of the veteran in cemetery program. There is also a planned reversion of $4.5 million in fiscal 25 budget from the $12.7 million in general funds that was included in fiscal 24 budget as supplemental budget number 2 for the procurement of new contractor for Charlotte Hall Veterans Home. We request the agency to comment on the reason for this planned reversion, given the substantial increase in funds budgeted in fiscal 25. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows a total of $63.4 million in the department's fiscal 25 allowance. $49.7 million is for the operation of Charlotte Hall accounts, of which 95.5% is used for contractual services for managing the facility and providing care to the veterans. Exhibit 2 on pages 4 and 5 shows that proposed budget increased by $8.2 million. The largest change of $13.5 million is due to the change in the structure of Charlotte Hall's management contract and its associated repair and maintenance costs. This is partially offset by the change in equipment, land, and structures due to one-time deficiency appropriation for equipment and Charlotte Hall facility upgrades. Moving on to page 6, personnel data. Fiscal 25 allowance includes 3 new regular positions, including a conversion of 1 contractual full-time equivalent to a regular position. There is an elimination of a part-time contractual full-time equivalent position. There were 16 vacant positions as of December 31st, 2023. 12 of these vacant positions are within the cemetery program. We request the agency to comment on the high vacancy rate and its efforts to fill these vacancies. Moving on to page 7. Charlotte Hall is under new management contract starting June 6th of 2023. Exhibit 3 on page 8 shows that the Charlotte Hall continues to operate under capacity. The occupancy rate has declined from 403 residents in December 2019 to 227 residents in December 2023. The facility has struggled with occupancy since the beginning of COVID-19, when it was unable to admit new residents, faced fatalities because of COVID, and experienced hesitancy of families to admit family members due to concerns around health, safety, and ability to visit. In a response to committee narrative in the 2023 JCR regarding Charlotte Hall, MDVA noted that it contracted with resident safety advocates and wellness nurses to conduct assessments and observe the implementation of the previous contractor's plan of correction and paused admissions to the facility in April 2023 during this assessment. The facility began readmitting residents on November 30th, 2023, which is 5 months after the change in the management contract in June 2023. This has also impacted the rebuilding of the census. We request the agency to comment on how its outreach activities can help increase Charlotte Hall's occupancy rate and other actions that the agency is taking to improve the occupancy rate. With the takeover of Charlotte Hall by the new management, the new financial provisions do not resemble those of the old contract. Exhibit 4 on pages 9 and 10 show a comparison of how the new financial provision compares to the old one. The second graph on page 9 shows the financial provision during the transition period to the new contract. Starting June 2023 through fiscal 24, through the end of fiscal 24, federal per diem reimbursement from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and new funding streams from Medicare, Medicaid, and private pay are sent to MDVA. The Medicare, Medicaid, and private pay revenues are all new to MDVA effective with the new contract. The state directly reimburses the new contractor for its monthly operating expenses, approved capital expenditures, and management fee of $36 per day per filled bed. The graph on page 10 shows the financial provision starting fiscal 25, where the Medicare, Medicaid, and private pay revenues are deposited in the general fund, and the state pays the contractor for expenses through general fund expenditures. Also, in a response to the 2023 JCR request for quarterly updates on Charlotte Hall staffing, MDVA notes that the hours of direct care provided per resident per day have increased from 3.7 hours in June 2023 to 4.7 hours in November 2023. Also, as a response to the 23 JCR, as of November 23, Charlotte Hall received an overall rating of 1 star in the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services report. with health inspections receiving 1 star, quality measure receiving 2 stars, and staffing receiving 4 stars. We request the agency to comment on its strategies for improving the overall ratings. There were 35 complaints from residents of the facility from June 6th to November 30th, 2023. Of these, 19 were allegations of abuse, 7 were allegations of misappropriation, 3 were of neglect. None of the complaints in the CMS report resulted a rating or a fine. 2 survey reports were submitted on November 7th, 2023, according to Section 1914C02A 1 and 2 of the State Government Article. 1 was an annual recertification survey for all of Charlotte Hall's skilled nursing and assisted living facilities, and the other was a 3-year look-back survey of the resident trust fund accounts and systems at Charlotte Hall. No major issues were identified in both the surveys. The DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting the continued submission of quarterly reports in collaboration with the new Charlotte Hall contractor on the progress of its operations, including efforts to increase staffing and residency numbers, and report rating or fine from CMS. Also, as a response to the 23 JCR report requesting report on MDVA's efforts to contact service members during their transition to civil life, MDVA's plans to expand the job pipeline for veterans, existing partnerships with state entities, and hiring programs for veterans in neighboring states. MDVA notes that it shares information on job fairs in its biweekly electronic newsletter and digital media channels. It is also exploring relaunch of Operation Hire Maryland, the 90-day Veterans Hiring Challenge led in calendar 2015 by the department's Outreach Program Director. We request the agency to comment on the status of the relaunch of this initiative. Page 13 is the DLS's recommended action to adopt the committee narrative requesting for quarterly reports on status of Charlotte Hall operations, staffing, and federal ratings. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the thorough analysis. Colleagues, any questions for the analyst? Okay, seeing none, we will bring up agency representative. We have Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Anthony Woods, with us. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Whenever you're ready.
Great. Good afternoon, Delegate Spiegel, members of the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Tony Woods, and I'm here with Director of Finance, Elena Charland. I want to start by thanking Yashua for her really thorough analysis of our budget request. We witnessed her diligence every step of the way in the days preceding this hearing, and we're very appreciative of it. I also want to take a moment to honor the memory of one of Maryland's truly great veteran leaders, former Secretary George Owings III, who passed away in October. George served with distinction for many years here in the General Assembly and led our department over 2 terms as secretary. I witness his impact daily in the quality of the team that he built at the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs. And this past year, it's been my privilege to lead that team in writing a new chapter and transforming the department to be even more responsive to the needs of the military-connected community here in Maryland. While continuing to strive for excellence in our core programs and in the care that we deliver at Charlotte Hall Veterans Home, I'm proud to say the department is also reaffirming our commitment to drive down suicide within the military-connected community and striving to meet our mission to military families. That said, I recognize that you have many budget presentations before you this afternoon, and so I will respect your time by keeping my comments brief. I will simply say that we are here in support of the governor's allowance and we'll be glad to take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your own service and as also for your leadership in supporting our veterans here in Maryland and our military families as well. Colleagues, any questions? I have just one question. I was wondering if you could provide a little bit more of an update on the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home now that the facility is under new management relative to the strategy to improve ratings and address what we've heard about. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the question, Delegate. I can assure you it's actually the thing that I think about every single day in this role. when Governor Moore, pledged that our governing philosophy is to leave no one behind. For me, that starts with our most vulnerable veterans. And for me, that is our veterans who reside at Charlotte Hall. On June 6th, we underwent a transition to Pruitt Health, who is our new operating partner. And I can tell you that culture and transforming the culture at Charlotte Hall is priority number one that is shared both by my department and the Pruitt Health Corporation. One of the things that I often point out is that you can lose your star ratings. You can go from 5-star to 1-star overnight. It will take many years to become a 5-star facility, but in the interim, we can provide top-notch quality care. And so my department works incredibly closely with the Pruitt Healthcare team to make sure that they're removing subcontractors who don't perform to standard, who don't deliver the care that we need to our residents. And so they've undergone a number of transitions at the subcontractor level for that very purpose. And with regard to improving clinical care outcomes, we're undergoing several things. So my department participates in weekly on-site visits. The Pruitt Health team, their regional senior consultants, medical teams, et cetera, they also visit the site on a weekly basis. We hold weekly meetings to discuss patients that are at risk and daily clinical meetings. We hold weekly meetings for the purpose of survey readiness, which provides us an opportunity to essentially inspect the facility on a bit-by-bit basis every week. We provide ongoing staff education and additional training. We hold weekly calls with Pruitt Health corporate nursing leadership. And then we also utilize a quality improvement system that provides predictive analytics and survey readiness that's focused on really improving quality measures and outcomes. All of these are part of an effort to continue to transform the culture there. I'm proud of our efforts to drive down the amount of agency or temporary nurses that we leverage at Charlotte Hall. We've actually cut that number in half, which means that we're working with a full-time workforce who we can then invest in training to improve their ability to deliver high quality care. I'll tell you that I will never be satisfied on any given day until I'm done in this role. And so for me, we always should be raising the bar and increasing the standard. And that's what that's the challenge that I put before the Pruitt Health team and what we hold them to every single day.
Well, thank you again to you and your entire team, Mr. Secretary, for all you do for those who have sacrificed so much for all of us. Seeing no further questions from my colleagues. Oh, we do have a question. Delegate McComas, please.
I think I started out today, all politics is local. I represent Harford County, and I know that a lot of folks, if they have to put family members in Charlotte Hall, it's difficult for them to be able to regularly visit. And this is obviously your 10 or 20-year plan, but are you eventually going to start working on maybe getting more satellites, facilities for folks, because it's hard for them to get down to where Charlotte Hall is, and I'm sure it's even worse for folks that are out in Western Maryland.
Delegate McComas, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I've learned in our experience with Charlotte Hall, it's incredibly important for every veteran who resides there to have good advocates. And so being able to stay close with loved ones and family members is quite important. And so to me, that really underscores the great point that you're making. So we're still pushing every single day to open the Sykesville home, which will be the second veteran retirement home. That'll be a 128-bed facility. And it's currently in the design and engineering phase right now. We're working through that process. Because the federal government provides $118 million of that construction cost, we also have to keep a close eye on the VA construction budget. I'm also happy to share that we're in very good conversations with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and we've agreed in principle for them to swap 7.7 acres at Perry Point, which would allow us to build a potentially third veteran retirement home after we've, of course, worked with the legislature to secure the funding for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Exciting potential developments. We'll keep our eye on those. Thank you. This ends the hearing on the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we will move to our next hearing, which is the Department of General Services. We'll ask our analyst to join us, please. Whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Spiegel and members of the committee. Again, my name is Samantha Tapia, presenting with the Department of Legislative Services, presenting the fiscal 2025 operating budget analysis for the Department of General Services. Looking at the operating budget summary on page 1, fiscal 2025 the budget is increased by $678,730, or 0.4% over fiscal 2024 to $170 million. This is primarily through $4.3 million in COLA or cost of living adjustments, increments, and reclassifications for existing positions, $2.4 million in salaries and benefits for 24 new regular positions, mostly in security and procurement. And this is offset by approximately $7.2 million due to fiscal 2024 investments related to fuel and utilities, energy efficiency, and the critical maintenance program. These and other changes can be found in more detail on pages 13 and 14. For a total budget overview, we can look at pages 11 and 12. For programmatic view, about 78% or 133 million is related to facilities, operations, and maintenance, planning and security, and 22% or 37 million for procurement, business, enterprise, real estate, and administration. For an expenditure type view, 51% or 87 million on personnel, 18% or 30 million on contractual services, 15% or 26 million on fuel and utilities, and the remaining 16% on maintenance and renovation, motor vehicles, and other operating expenses. Looking at personnel on page 14, the personnel budget for DGS includes 727 regular positions and 41 contractual positions for fiscal 2025. This is an increase of 24 regular positions from the previous year, most notably with 10 new police officers for DGS headquarters and 8 procurement officers for the Office of State Procurement. Other positions are administrative, helping to manage higher volumes of activity and improve efficiency and compliance. Regarding the improvement in the vacancy rate from 12.3% in January of last year to just 6.5% this January, DGS reported that it has targeted higher turnover positions with compensation increases and worked to better distribute workloads and improve working conditions for all employees. Moving to a few performance metrics, looking at procurement on page 4. The Office of State Procurement has a goal of processing 80% of large procurements within 90 days. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows that DGS nearly always meets this goal, but data integrity for this measure remains an issue, being addressed in the development of the eMaryland Marketplace system, which is discussed further in Appendix 3. However, we do note that the total number of procurements increased significantly, 126% in fiscal 2023 over 2022, but the number of statewide contracts decreased nearly 36%. So we've asked DGS to comment on the reasons for this. Then looking at minority business enterprise, MBE participation on page 5. The goal of the program is to increase procurement opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses, and policy through the governor's office has set a goal of 29% of contracts awarded to MBE businesses. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows that at 34.2 million in prime contracts and 78.3 million in subcontracts, or 19.5% of contracts in fiscal 2023, the participation rate remains well below the target 29%. So we've asked DGS to comment on its ongoing outreach efforts and any additional actions it may take to reach the target 29%. Then looking at energy consumption on page 6, starting on page 6. On its website, DGS keeps a publicly accessible state energy database showing annual and monthly historical data on energy consumption by state agencies. While always useful in aggregate, DGS has reported that the data is not always complete due to inconsistent timing of reporting from agencies. DGS started a pilot program in calendar 2022 to redirect utilities invoices directly to the energy database contractor in an effort to remove the administrative burden of transmitting the information. We've asked DGS to comment on the status of this pilot program and plans and costs of its expansion. The analysis includes further discussion of state energy consumption, noting yearly increases in energy costs due to market trends in Exhibit 3 on page 7, including a profile of expenditure by utility type, Exhibit 4 on page 8, and a discussion of energy procurement contracts, energy performance contracts, sorry. To touch on what DGS has been doing more specifically to reduce energy costs, we noted that in the fiscal 2023 annual report, DGS reported on a project to install more LED lighting in state buildings. DGS expected cost savings of approximately 1 million and a reduction of 4.8 million kilowatt hours of electricity. So we've asked DGS to comment further on this project regarding implementation costs and measuring ongoing energy savings. Moving to issues, facilities renewal and critical maintenance. Starting on page 17. DGS is responsible for supervising the ongoing maintenance and repair of all publicly owned property. This effort can generally be broken down into smaller procurements under 100,000, which is the critical maintenance program in the operating budget, including while larger projects are budgeted and managed in the on the capital side with facilities renewal. An ongoing issue is the backlog of maintenance and renovation projects on both sides. Exhibit 10 on page 18 indicates changes in volume and estimated costs from January 2022 to this January 2024. The corresponding priority level descriptions are on page 17. Total estimated costs increased 54% to 27.4 million, in particular 9.6 million for priority level 3 projects or end-of-life replacements for lighting and air conditioning, for example, but also for priority level 2 projects, which are, for example, defective or prematurely aging assets at 1.2 million. Looking at the computerized maintenance system, starting on page 20, DGS uses a computerized maintenance management system, or CMMS, referred to as eMaint, which supports the tracking of equipment lists, work orders, and project justifications. Exhibit 13 on page 21 illustrates changes in preventative and unscheduled maintenance work orders. The number of preventive and unscheduled work orders were 18% and 11% below the 2022 levels, respectively. And the overall share of preventive work orders has decreased from 53% in fiscal 2019 to 30% in fiscal 2023. DGS reported last year that decreases could be explained by inconsistent recording of activity in the eMaint system. So we've asked DGS to comment further on what it has been doing to improve the recording of maintenance work orders this year. Then looking at page 22, we've also discussed the ongoing installation of sensors in buildings to detect issues that may lead to damage or safety hazards. These installations are ongoing, and we've asked DGS to comment further on the types of issues detected by the sensors and how maintenance staff are responding to information or alerts generated by them. And looking at State Center on page 24, agency relocation out of the State Center complex has been many years in the making. Most agencies are now scheduled for relocation in calendar 2024 before planning begins in fiscal 2025 for demolition. As of January 2024, 11 agencies remain at State Center in Saratoga, and all but 3 currently have plans to relocate within the year. Exhibit 16 on page 25 and Exhibit 17 on page 26 summarize lease and relocation plans for these agencies. The Department of Health will move during fiscal 2026, while the Department of General Services, the Tax Court, and Disabilities and Telephone Relay Services have not finalized relocation plans. The fiscal 2022 budget included 50 million in the dedicated purpose account for State Center relocation, rent, and moving costs. An additional 30 million is included in the DPA for the same purpose in fiscal 2024. 5 million is included in the fiscal 2025 DPA budget for the State Center demolition. DLS has recommended adopting committee narrative requesting updates in July and December of fiscal 2025 on the status of state center moves and the use of the DPA funds. Finally, just looking at training MFR quickly in fiscal, and this is our last on page 28. In fiscal 2022, DGS received $300,000 to develop a training program to address a need for greater management training across state agencies. The first training programs planned in partnership with Towson University were expected to begin in the second quarter of fiscal 2024. And last year's Joint Chairman's report included a request that DGS include new MFR measures related to this program in the fiscal 2025 MFR data submission. DGS did include the measures, but we requested commentary on the status of the training program and on elements of the training reflected in the reported measures. In summary, we have two recommendations. First, the updates on state center agency relocations, and then we have a standard recommendation in response to repeat audit findings. A May 2023 audit of this Office of State Procurement found repeat findings related to regulatory compliance and documentation of activities. This action would restrict funding pending remedy of these issues as verified and reported by the Office of Legislative Audits. But apart from that, we recommend concurring with the governor's allowance. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you, Samantha. Colleagues, do we have any questions for Samantha on Department of General Services? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. Secretary Chaudhry and your team, you can approach and start your panel when you're ready. And we appreciate you all making time.
Okay,
They should be ready now.
great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Lewis, Vice Chair Ivy, and members of the committee. It's great to be here before you today, and thank you for the opportunity to be present to present the fiscal year 2025 operating budget for the Department of General Services. For the record, I am Lateef Chaudhry, Secretary of the Maryland Department of General Services. With me here today is Nelson Riker, Deputy Secretary, as well as Willie Tin Chow, who is the CFO for the department. First of all, we'd like to thank Samantha Tapia at the Department of Legislative Services for her analysis on our fiscal year 25 operating budget request. And we really appreciate her hard work and understanding of our complex agency. DGS is very much a support agency with expertise in real estate, construction, procurement, and the management and securing of state facilities throughout the state. The operating budget recommendations for fiscal year 25 include two recommendations. One is adding language restricting funds pending a report from the Office of Legislative Audits on the status of corrective actions related to the most recent fiscal compliance audit for Office of State Procurement. And the second is adopting committee narrative requesting a status report on state center relocations. DGS concurs with both of these recommendations. The department was also asked to prepare a brief the committee on 8 topics. We have before you today our written responses to these 8 topics. And being respectful of the committee's time, we are happy to provide an overview of these responses at the discretion of the chair.
Thank you for your report back, colleagues. Do you have questions for the secretary? Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, and to your entire team. I had a few questions. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about energy costs, if I may.
Sure.
I note that the analysis talks about costs being up 11+%. I'm assuming that's an issue with the cost increase of electricity and not an issue with increased usage. But I'm wondering if you could add a little clarity to that, as well as where the department stands on the effort to update lighting to LEDs.
Thank you, Delegate Spiegel, for that. Yes, absolutely. The increased cost in utility costs are directly related to the cost of energy. As everyone's well aware, energy costs have gone up over the years. And even while we are reducing our energy usage with the cost being going up, our operating expenses go up directly related proportional to that. When it comes to the LED lighting, we have in our analysis here in our response some updates regarding our efforts. We've spent quite a bit of money updating LED lighting throughout state facilities, including this one we're in right now. And the cost savings has been pretty significant, I want to say. Here, so the total dollar value since fiscal year 2020, we spent over $12 million in energy conservation projects related to LED lighting. Average annual energy savings are approximately $1.2 million. And we also have energy rebates we've received of over $2.7 million as well. The payback period of this is approximately a little over 7 years, but we have reduced over 2,900 tons of greenhouse gas emissions associated with just the LED lighting projects that we have. And we've got other ones queued up as well as we continue to work with our partner agencies to update LED lighting throughout facilities.
Great, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just another couple of questions.
No, go ahead, proceed.
Thank you. On the issue of strategic sourcing of procurement, wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the department's vision for how you plan to go about that. Is it embracing more of the federal model of supply schedules? Is it doing more multiple award scheduling? Do you have sort of specific ideas in mind for how to implement that kind of strategic sourcing? Thanks.
Yeah, actually, we're looking at different options that are available right now when it comes to strategic sourcing. We have a strategic sourcing unit that looks at different opportunities. And we have a full commodities unit that focuses on taking a look at what's available in the market and doing market research associated with this. And that's separate and distinct from our IT and professional services as well as our construction units as well. So really dedicated to taking a look at what we can do to help really identify what's out there in the market to make sure we really leverage our buying power as a state. And that really ties into two things. One is ensuring that we're using statewide contracts appropriately, and they meet the needs of the state. And we have that in part of our analysis here as well. And as necessary, taking a look at where statewide contracts do not necessarily meet the needs. Do we have specific more contracts geared towards agency needs to make sure we're fully meeting the agency needs?
Great. And then one final question, if I may, Mr. Chair. I know that the conversation around State Center today and in the analysis really focuses on operating issues over the next year or two when we're talking about moving agencies, relocating agencies out of State Center and demolition. But I'm wondering if you just take a moment to talk a little bit about the department's view of State Center as a capital asset for future redevelopment and what the horizon sort of looks like as we get through the process of moving agencies and demolition. Thank you.
No, thank you, Delegate Spiegel. That's a great question. So obviously there's 4 large buildings at State Center. And right now we're taking a look at, we're developing a sort of a plan, not only a transition plan out of State Center, but sort of what could a potential future use of the site be. We're closing very closely with leadership from Baltimore City as well in that regard for the best potential use of that site that would be in the best interest of the community and the neighborhoods as well, and the best interest of the state as well. It is right on the metro line as well as light rail and bus lines as well. So it makes it a very valuable commodity there on the site. But I think in the coming months, we'll be taking a look at developing a plan or a solution going forward. Right now, we are anticipating everyone moving out towards the end of calendar 25. And as we move towards that goal, I believe we have plenty of time to sort of develop a solution or plan to try and make sure we be best use of that property. Great.
Thank you for bearing with me in my questions, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No worries. Colleagues, any other questions? So I have one, is tied to, I think, your response on the request for information and reaching out to, I think, MBEs in that regard. So obviously with our proximity to the nation's capital, we have a larger share of federal government contractors in Maryland or in our area. And I've wondered to what degree we have leveraged requests for information in reaching out to folks who I think based on past laws we have could have reciprocity. And if you're a disadvantaged business federally, you can often opt in for the minority business enterprise certification in the state to kind of broaden the number of applicants so that it's almost like the state is encouraging folks, whether they're currently MBE certified or not, but like they reach these broader goals to participate. Can you just speak on that a little bit?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think here we'll be coordinating, and we've got a plan to coordinate with the Maryland Department of Transportation, who currently certify MBE firms in the state. And the way the current procurement is currently structured, when it comes to a prime contractor having MBE subcontractors, the only way they're able to receive credit is if they are MBE certified through the Maryland Department of Transportation. So that's something we'll be taking a look at, different opportunities there for reciprocity and other things. But I think when it comes to the RFI process, we're really looking to go out and we started this as a pilot program here at the Office of State Procurement to really gauge the market and what is the actual acceptable or measured success when it comes to a particular contract for MBE goaling. And what I mean by that is we typically historically have looked at market research and the number of MBE firms as an example in a geographic area or that provide this service in the state. But we haven't really gone out and the federal government actually does this right now, where they go out and actually test the market through an RFI process to see how many firms out there are willing to do this. And this helps inform us pre-solicitation on what we can put as a goal. And there may be opportunities there for prime contractors that have that leverage other relationships with MBE firms to increase their goals higher than we normally would have said through a normal market research analysis for a particular geographic region, which may be will have a limited number of MBE firms operating in that particular region. So I think to answer your question, we're looking at that opportunity as well and how we can do that. And we are doing quite a bit of outreach with firms to ensure that all firms that are minority businesses are registered. That way they can get the credit they deserve as being an MBE firm in the state.
Thank you for that response. Yeah, getting through the MBE certification process for a lot of business owners can be challenging. Sure. Oftentimes they have to hire legal counsel, they have to hire a CPA to get their books and report on everything. It can be a tedious process because the Maryland market is often smaller, obviously, than the federal government. Yes. We have a lot of minority business owners here in Maryland that forego MBE certification just going to the bigger market of the federal government. Reason why I say that is that I think if they were outreached by, even though they're not a current MBE, but if they were outreached by the state because they meet federal qualifications as part of this market research, I think then they would see, based off of that desire by the state to go through the process of getting their certification. I understand that's not DGS's sole responsibility and that is tied, but I would encourage you guys to endeavor that, to make sure more of these businesses that are located in our state actually apply for the opportunity to be in business with our state.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And as an example, we have there's an MBE night in Annapolis next week that
I am well aware. We might help plan it.
That we will be attending and have several tables there set up. And it was a great success last year as well that we attended. And it's a great opportunity there as an example for outreach, where lots of firms that we talk to there, exactly what you said, either I'm certified and I'm doing work, or I'm not certified because it's very onerous, or I'm certified with the federal government. How do I engage? And we hear it a lot, exactly what you said. They chase the contracts that have the larger dollars, which is with the federal government. So we're absolutely engaging with that community as part of the outreach, as well as with this RFI process, sort of understand what's available and how can we participate and facilitate. And we'll be very coordinating very closely with the MBE program and MDOT to see how we can help facilitate and address a lot of these pain points that we're hearing.
Wonderful. I really appreciate that. Colleagues, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you and your team for your service.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to move now to workers' compensation. Yeah, so Elizabeth, you can begin when you're ready, and after that, Maureen Quinn, good to see you. Yeah, so after her analysis, then we'll bring you up. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'll jump right in. The Workers' Compensation Commission's fiscal 2025 allowance increases 5% or 1.1 million from 2024 to a total of $23.7 million. These are all in special funds that come from an assessment on insurers. On page 2, in the pie chart, you'll see that most of the allowance, or $14.9 million, goes to personnel costs. A further $2.3 million goes to finish out the CompHub IT project, which is a major project the commission has going on to modernize their case management system. The system itself launched last August, but they're still working through some bugs and making updates and doing some training around that. But it is expected to finish this year. There's also $2.6 million for contractual services, and the largest portion of that is in IT services contracts. Turning to page 3, Exhibit 2, the proposed budget change. You'll see the largest increases are in personnel costs and in those IT services contracts that I mentioned. And the largest decrease is in costs for the major IT project. So there's a decrease in the IT development and launch costs, and then a corresponding increase in maintenance costs. On page 4, the personnel section, I wanted to mention there's 13 vacant positions, 6 of them are in IT. Like many agencies, the commission's been struggling to fill some of those, particularly in the IT field. They are also planning to add 7 new contractual personnel to operate metal detectors at the hearing locations. On page 5, the key observations. The commission is continuing to improve the timeliness of setting hearings. In fiscal 23, they set 95% of non-permanency hearings within 60 days of filing. And those are the hearings that aren't about a permanent injury on the job. On page 6, this is just an update on assessments on insurers that fund the commission. The total overall payroll increased in fiscal 23 more than the commission expenses did, so the rate of the assessment decreased somewhat. And these assessments support the commission's work as well as the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health Program. You'll see the DLS recommendation, which is found on page 7, is to concur with the governor's allowance. And that concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Colleagues, any questions for Elizabeth? Thank you so much. Maureen, you and your team can approach and begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Lewis, Vice Chair Ivy. And I'm happy to see that my home city of Rockville is now represented on this committee. Congratulations, Delegate Spiegel. With me today, beginning on my left, is Teresa Cornish. She is our Chief Operating Officer, and she's going to become our CEO on June 1st when our CEO retires. And to my right is our CFO, Dave Jones, and to his right is our Director of Fiscal Services, Jay Moore. I became the chair of the commission around this time last year, and I returned this year with good news, both operationally and fiscally. For those of you who don't know this, even before becoming chair, I was a commissioner judge at my agency for the 20 preceding years. I want to begin by saying thank you to our analyst, Elizabeth Wabel, for your hard work on our budget. We look forward to working with you, and we concur with the recommended action of the governor and the analyst allowing our budget request. I want to take a moment to just make sure that you know that the workers' compensation insurance industry is financially robust, and insurance companies are fiercely competing for business customers. A healthy insurance market is the greatest gift I can envision, both for injured workers and the business community. This past year, NCCI recommended a 10.4% decrease in premiums. And this is large and continues a 14-year downward trend in rates. So it is against this backdrop that I offer my remarks about our budget. My greatest priority this past year was the purchase of metal detectors and the staff to operate them at our 6 permanent courthouse locations. The project was completed on September 30th, and Dave Jones and Commissioner Evans oversaw that operation both with haste and fiscal responsibility, and I'm extremely grateful to both of them for their work. My second priority was the deployment of our new computer system that Elizabeth Wade will just refer to, known as Comp Hub. This was a major overhaul, 7 years and $25 million in the making. The first 3 months I'd describe as the shakedown cruise of a new aircraft carrier. But we are seaworthy now, and users have begun to talk about all of the features they like in the new system. Tech support calls are down 85%. But this next year will demand much of our executive team as we intend to tackle features in the system that are operating exactly as designed, but are not exactly what particular stakeholders would like. In late August, we received the auditor's report covering the years 2018 to 2022. There were 3 findings, 2 of them repeat findings. But most importantly, the most substantive finding, which wasn't a repeat finding, was that we were not sufficiently proactive in tracking down uninsured companies. I made a key personnel change in the insurance compliance division to address this audit finding, and also to address the repeat finding of lax record keeping in that unit. But even before we received the audit, we had recovered from the pandemic pause in pursuing uninsured companies and substantially increased our fines in both FY 2023 and 2024. We are also working on an MOU with the Department of Unemployment Insurance to use its data to track down additional companies that are uninsured. We have been collaborating with the Uninsured Employers Fund, the UEF, to address an audit that predicts that the UEF will be insolvent by FY 2030. We absolutely cannot have this political crisis that would arise from a worker being injured on the job and having no recourse when the employer has no insurance. I have spoken with the workers' comp policy representatives in the House and the Senate about the creation of a task force to prevent that insolvency. I know that if we start to find solutions now, that we will succeed in avoiding this catastrophe. UEF Director Burns will be before you next week, and he will no doubt brief you more extensively regarding this issue. With respect to rebuilding state government, we have 115 full-time employees. Vacancies since last year have gone from 17 down to 13, but as was mentioned, the IT vacancy rate is still 50%. After I took office, I undertook a demographic analysis of our agency, and my suspicions were confirmed. 40% of our employees are retirement eligible, and 33% of them are over the age of 60. We hired 28 people last year. Half of them were the metal detector staff. But no matter what we do on recruitment, we are up against the tide of our demography. Lastly, we talked last year about moving to a digital court reporting system because I had had 2 unfilled court reporter positions that had been vacant for a year and 4 likely retirements looming. Now, I know I have a couple of lawyers on this committee, and you know that if you don't have a court reporter, you can't open a courtroom. So this was not a trivial matter. So after our hearing last year, a raise that had been requested for the court reporters was granted, and I allowed permanent work from home for any reporter who was having a day when she was not in court. The reporters were thrilled with that those changes, and they deferred their retirement. And then after that, 2 retired federal court reporters filled those long vacant positions. So in the end, I was fully staffed for the entire year. I lost 1 reporter last month, but we do have applicants for her vacancy. Nonetheless, the RFP for digital court reporting infrastructure is drafted, and when CompHub becomes less of a drain on our executive staff, we will turn our attention to the procurement process. And with that, I await your questions.
Thank you so much, folks, for being here, for the work. Congratulations to your new role that
Thank
you're
you.
beginning as CEO. I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job. I would say on behalf of the committee, we also appreciate the innovative approach and adaptability to maintaining the state workforce. One of the things that we've heard through DBM reporting back to us is just, for staff who can use remote options, it will allow them to defer retirement, as well as it will help with recruiting younger folks who want to come in, and that's a premium. So the fact that you leaned into that and it helped shows that we're listening, which is great. I also appreciate the fact that you addressed a number of the audit findings straight out the gate. Colleagues, do you all have any questions for Maureen? Delegate Spiegel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, always a pleasure to see you. I have to commend you and the entire commission team for exceeding your goal of setting hearings within 60 days. You had a goal of 90% and you achieved 95%. And that is coming off of the delays and challenges of the COVID era, which obviously led to lower percents for any agency that was dealing with any kind of scheduling issues. I don't know if your success has anything to do with CompHub or if that's a separate system, but I just wanted to ask you what the secret was to your commission doing such an amazing job of addressing that scheduling goal and really exceeding it. Thank you.
It's like a lot of goals. If you shine a light on it, then you have to pay attention to it. And I was particularly concerned about delays that I saw in the rural parts of our state, where what would happen is there were only maybe 3 or 4 people who needed a hearing. So that wasn't enough to send out a judge. And they were holding the setting of those hearings until they had, maybe 20 or 25 cases. So we're still moving away from that and trying to even do better. But if I can just take a moment and brag about my commissioners on some other metric. We issue orders within 6 days of a hearing on average. So speed is really the lifeblood of our work.
I'll just say that other judicial and quasi-judicial bodies could learn a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I second that. Colleagues, any other comments? Well, Madam Chair and your team, thank you all for being here and for the service to our state.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, we are going to go to the Department of Juvenile Services. So we're going to start with the analysis from DLS, and then afterwards, Secretary Schiraldi will call you and your team up. You can begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Miller, and today I will be presenting the DLS operating budget analysis for the Department of Juvenile Services. The allowance grows 3.8% compared with the working appropriation to $338.6 million. Over 3/4 of the change can be attributed to personnel salary enhancements. A discussion of the department's performance measures begins on page 4. Complaints can be made to DJS by law enforcement, schools, parents, and members of the community. Arrests and referrals from school resource officers are the primary way that youth become involved with DJS and with the juvenile justice system. Juvenile arrest trends for calendar 2018 to 2022 are shown in Exhibit 1. Total juvenile arrests over the 5 years are down 44.5%, though arrests increased by 32.7% between calendar 21 and 22. Complaints to DJS are categorized by the most serious offenses involved in the referral, and data from fiscal 23 is summarized in Exhibit 2. Of the 12,388 complaints, 65% are related to alleged misdemeanors. Approximately 4.1% are related to child in need of supervision petitions. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the total number of complaints received by DJS over the past decade and complaint dispositions. Complaints rose 14.9% between fiscal 22 and 23 and rise an additional 7.4% in year-to-date data. The estimated increase would still represent a 10.7% decrease from the fiscal 2020 level. Each type of complaint rose between fiscal 22 and 23. The share of formal cases that require court intervention made up 34.5% of cases in fiscal 23, compared with 31.4% in fiscal 2022. A slightly smaller proportion of cases were closed at intake. The non-residential placement population includes youth who are receiving informal supervision on probation or in aftercare programming, and non-residential population trends are shown in Exhibit 4 on page 7. Between fiscal 2014 and 2022, the total non-residential caseload decreased 75.6%. Caseloads increased 2% between fiscal 22 and 24. Informal caseloads will likely increase in fiscal 24 as efforts to divert youth from residential placements continue. DJS diverts youth to more therapeutic placements when possible, such as an alternative to detention program. When a youth enters the juvenile system, DJS personnel administer the detention risk assessment instrument to produce a recommendation of whether the youth should be detained, placed in an ATD, or released. The tool was last updated in December 2022. If it determines that a youth would be best placed in an alternative to detention, there are three main options: community detention with or without electronic monitoring, evening reporting centers, and shelter care. Exhibit 5 on page 9 shows cases by ATD program category in fiscal 23. Electronic monitoring is the most frequently used program at 53.5% of cases. The detained average daily population consists of three smaller populations: the secured detention predisposition population, the secured pending placement population, and the adult court authorized detention population or adult court population. Changes to the detention population are shown in Exhibit 6 on page 10. Since overall complaints rose 74.5% between fiscal 21 and 23, and the courts have been fully operational, average daily population has risen to 262.4 youth in fiscal 24 year-to-date data. This figure is 3.8% higher than in fiscal 2020, even as the predisposition and pending placement population average daily populations remain 44.5% and 2% below their fiscal 2020 levels, respectively. The adult court population now accounts for 61% of the detained population. The growth in this population is contributing to higher utilization rates within DJS detention facilities, as will be discussed later in an issue. Compared to pre-pandemic levels in fiscal 2019, the average length of stay for the predisposition, pending placement, and adult court authorized populations have increased by 10.6%, 79.1%, and 5.6% respectively. This is depicted in Exhibit 7 on page 11. Like the detention population, the population of youth in DJS committed residential programming has also increased. State-run committed residential facilities do not provide adequate capacity to accommodate the number of youths requiring out-of-home placements, nor do they provide the full complement of programming required to address the variety of treatment needs for the committed population. To that end, the department contracts with private in-state and out-of-state vendors to provide services to committed youth. Exhibit 8 shows the committed residential ADP for each of the possible committed placements between fiscal 2014 and 2024 year-to-date data. The committed population rose by 4.5% in fiscal 2023, with almost all of the growth coming from placements in state-operated facilities. Growth is expected to continue in fiscal 24 based on the first 6 months of the year. Per diem placements are programs operated by private providers, and the state pays for only the number of days that a youth is actually placed in the program. Since fiscal 2014, the private per diem average daily population has fallen by 90.1% to 58.8 youth in fiscal 24 year-to-date data. The out-of-state ADP increased by 3.8 youths, and the population is so small that results in an increase of 49.4% in fiscal 2023. Out-of-state placements accounted for just 8.3% of the department's total committed ADP in that year. DJS also provides aftercare and reentry services to youth in the juvenile justice system. As youth leave the juvenile justice system, they face several challenges in joining their communities once again. This includes re-enrolling in school, finding work, or addressing somatic or behavioral health needs. The reentry process is managed by regional reentry teams who oversee each youth's return to their community. Families of committed youth are invited and encouraged to participate in the reentry planning process, and the outcomes of follow-up visits between DJS staff and previously committed youths are documented and reported to the department as shown in Exhibit 9 on page 14. The percentage of families of committed youth who felt informed during their child's commitment and reentry process was not reported in fiscal 23 data. Going forward, the department will instead report the percentage of youth and families meaningfully engaged in the case planning process. Only one of the other 5 measures improved since fiscal 2022, and only 2 measures have improved compared to fiscal 2019 or the first year of available data. DJS notes that while this data is accurate, some may be missing. Fewer than anticipated youth reentry checklists were completed in fiscal 2023. Additional strategic reentry measures will be reported for fiscal 2024. And then youth recidivism rates within 2 and 3 years of release are have decreased and are detailed in Exhibit 10 on page 15. The decline of the rearrest rate suggests that policing practices are rearresting youth at a slower rate, while the decline in the readjudication and recommitment rates suggest that the juvenile justice system has been effective in reducing youth involvement in the judicial system. One explanation for why youth are beginning to be rearrested at a slower rate is that total youth arrests decreased in calendar 20 and 2021, likely in connection to the pandemic, and that's based on the available data. We will not have calendar 2023 arrest data until next year, or I guess maybe November, December. Changes to the working appropriation are discussed on pages 16 and 17. Major changes include the addition of funds to ROCA and the launch of the Safe Summer Initiative. DJS received $1 million in general funds through Section 19 of the fiscal 2024 budget bill to expand the services of ROCA Inc. around the state, in addition to the $2 million general fund mandate for the organization's operations. The fiscal 25 allowance includes the $2 million in mandated funding. The working appropriation grew by $3.1 million in federal ARPA funds for the Safe Summer Initiative. DJS coordinated with the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy and the Department of Human Services to allocate funds. The spending plan for the initiative, shown in Exhibit 11 on page 17, includes $5 million total. The initiative is expected to last for the duration of fiscal 2024. One of the elements funded through DJS is the Thrive Academy, and the Thrive Academy is expected to expand its operations and is funded with general funds in the allowance. DJS should comment on how ARPA funds are being used by local governments to support the initiative, as this information cannot be provided when budget amendments for the initiative were submitted earlier this year. An overview of agency spending is provided with the pie chart on page 18. Of the $338.6 million budget, approximately 73% supports personnel expenses. Youth programming, including the purchase of care services and youth education programming, accounts for about 11% of the total budget. The remaining 17% are allocated to contractual services, supplies, and equipment, and other operating costs. Growth between fiscal 24 and 25, $12.5 million, is explained in the proposed budget change chart on pages 19 and 20. Much of the increase is attributable to net increases in the department's personnel budget. Other large changes include the net expansion of the Thrive Academy and higher medical care costs for youth. Growth in these areas is offset by lower costs of interagency agreements for non-residential care and the removal of funds for the purchase of instructional material and library supplies. Shown in Exhibit 14 on page 21, medical care costs rose 46.3%, or $1.6 million, corresponding with a 33% increase in the detention population and the 4.5% increase in the committed youth population. Actual expenditures rose 70 4.4% between fiscal 22 and 2023, which is the actual year of spending reflected in the top of the proposed budget change chart. The allowance is budgeted based on fiscal 2023 actual spending. In its testimony, DJS should comment on whether a deficiency is required to meet the costs of medical care for youth in fiscal 2024, or how funding will be realigned to support costs if they are necessary. The budget also grows by approximately $2.7 million for additional Thrive Academy expenses. The Thrive Academy is a community-based gun violence prevention program and case management model. Youth who are identified as being at high risk of being a victim or perpetrator of gun violence are provided with services such as life coaches, financial incentives, work and service stipends, reallocation assistance, and college tuition or vocational training. In the Thrive Academy model, youth in need of services are identified, and DJS contracts with organizations in different regions to provide services. DJS launched the program on September 1st in 2023 in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. In 2024, operations began in Anne Arundel and Prince George's counties earlier in January. Across the 4 jurisdictions in fiscal 24, there are currently 49 youths who are enrolled. DLS asked that the department comment on how it will procure services in fiscal 25, the expected youth participation in fiscal 25, the estimated cost of the program per participant in both the working appropriation and the allowance, and how the use of the Thrive Academy will be evaluated over time for efficacy and affordability. 2 additional sources of spending growth include the Child, Juvenile, and Adult Management System transition, which is a data management IT project that the department is currently going through, and the replacement of phone systems that were end of life nearly 2 decades ago. A review of personnel data can be found on pages 23 and 24. The allowance reflects a reduction of 20 regular long-term vacant positions and a net reduction of 11.5 contractual positions. Turnover expectancy increases to 7.72% in the allowance compared with 5.75% in the working appropriation. Based on the department's hiring rate, this is a cost-saving measure and a better representation of departmental needs. However, the department's overtime needs are under budgeted in fiscal 2024. The overtime allowance increases by $3.4 million to bring funding approximately in line with fiscal 23 actual spending and to account for higher salaries. DJS reports that it is reviewing strategies to realign existing funds to address the projected deficit. In total, personnel expenses increased by approximately $9.7 million. The issues section begins on page 25, and the first 2 relate to the department's strategic planning documents. At the end of last month, DJS released a 5-year strategic plan with 4 broad goals, which are to improve public safety, improve youth outcomes, build partnerships to improve all outcomes, and achieve organization excellence. DJS also presented 11 strategies that are supported with roadmaps in this document. Many of the strategies are addressed in the fiscal 24 and 2025 budgets, including creating an intensive intervention for youth at risk of gun violence involvement, which is the Thrive Academy, create and implement a comprehensive community investment strategy, and right-size spending and space. Funding is also provided in the dedicated purpose account in fiscal 2025 for actions that support the goal of building partnerships to improve all outcomes. There is $7 million for the Enhanced Services Continuum and $5 million for the Community Investment Initiative. DLS asks that the department provide a spending plan for the Enhanced Services Continuum in fiscal 2025 and describe the services needed by youth in these populations. The department should also comment on how it will work with DPSCS and DHS to launch the opportunity networks required by the Community Investment Initiative, how site locations will be chosen, and describe how it will procure services for the Community Investment Initiative. The second issue relates to capital planning. Though average daily population for detained and committed youth remains below its pre-pandemic levels, actions taken by DJS in recent years have reduced the total bed space available for both populations, as shown in Exhibit 15 on page 26. Between fiscal 2019 and 2024, on different occasions, facilities have been closed and populations moved to bring youth closer to their communities, to provide better service provision for female youth, to address staffing issues, and because of poor facility conditions. In fiscal 2021, there were 7 open detention facilities with a total capacity of 383 youth and 6 open committed facilities with a total capacity of 110 youth. Currently, detention capacity is 312 beds and committed capacity is 84. The department has not required the use of capital funds to manage these changes in its bed capacity, though funding in the fiscal 25 capital budget is included for a committed treatment center, which would add 24 beds for male youth in a few years. The current capital improvement program is shown in Exhibit 16 on page 27. Given the different population characteristics and the reduced capacity of facilities, the most recent facilities master plan from 2015 is no longer aligned with the department's needs. As stated in its 5-year strategy plan, DJS is in the process of assessing all facilities and will have a new facilities master plan completed by the end of calendar 2024. DLS recommends withholding $100,000 in general funds pending the submission of the FMP by January 1st, 2025. The third issue on page 29 relates to out-of-home placement wait times. DJS is the second largest youth placing agency in Maryland for youth who require an out-of-home placement. During the 2023 session, the Budget Committee has requested that DJS provide a report on the wait times that the youth it places experience before receiving a community-based placement, hospitalization, family home placement, or a non-community-based placement. Data was requested for calendar 2023. DJS reports that average length of stay for a youth pending placement to an out-of-home placement in its care was 52.2 days in fiscal 2023, though in its report, wait times for each type of out-of-home placement were not provided. The report was submitted over a month late, and though it contained information relevant to the request, the data was not provided in the requested format. Accordingly, DJS recommends the committees adopt language withholding $50,000 in fiscal 25 general funds pending the submission of an updated report by January 1st, 2025. The recommended actions from DLS are listed starting on page 30, and that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Madeline. Your analysis, as always, is very thorough and comprehensive, and we appreciate it. Colleagues, do we have any questions for Ms. Miller? Seeing none, you get a breather. Thank you. With that, Secretary Schiraldi and your team, you can approach and begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Chair Lewis and Vice Chair Ivy. Good afternoon, and members of the commission, or members of the panel. For the record, my name is Vinny Schiraldi, Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services. At the table with me today is Tiffany Johnson and Kara Annenson. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the Department of Legislative Services fiscal year 2025 budget analysis. DJS would like to thank our assigned analyst, Madeline Miller, for her thorough analysis. The analysis requests that DJS respond to 5 issues and 2 recommended actions. Before I get to the responses and recommended actions, I'd like to just say a few words about the department. DJS continues to implement reforms and initiatives aimed at improving public safety through direct community engagement. Over the past year, DJS partnered with local communities to ensure that young people returning home and those served in the community were supported through strong community connections. DJS initiated new community-based and facility programming to better meet the needs of youth in our care while holding them accountable, all to improve public safety. DJS is committed to improving outcomes for the youth we serve, not just by reducing their recidivism rates, but also by achieving outcomes related to educational attainment, workforce development, civic engagement, and other positive youth development opportunities. What we believe is that the more time kids spending doing positive things, the less trouble they're going to get into. The Thrive Academy is the first program in the country where a juvenile justice agency is applying a group violence reduction strategy specifically focused on youth in the juvenile justice system. The Thrive Academy started in Baltimore City and Baltimore County in September 23, and expanded to Prince George's and Anne Arundel counties in January of 24. Just those 4 jurisdictions represent 85% of the gun violence against young people throughout Maryland last year. Each Thrive Youth is paired with a specialized DJS case manager and a life coach from a nonprofit, employing people with lived experiences in the justice system. The life coaches are people who have often walked in the same shoes as the young people, who meet with them and their parents or guardians to very clearly explain the ramifications of gun violence, including possibly going to prison, harming others, themselves coming to harm, or their families coming to harm. This isn't just an empty lecture, because the life coaches then help develop a life plan that moves the youth away from gun violence and towards success. Once that plan is developed and agreed upon, the life coach is in contact with the youth and family frequently to provide support and assure that they're staying on the right path. Thrive Academy youth are also provided with what we call a suitcase for success. It's individualized for each kid's needs and may include stipended employment with local employers or paid service opportunities, along with workplace support and coaching, assistance with attending college or vocational training, confidential relocation assistance for youth and families who are in danger of gun violence, trauma therapy, opportunities for pro-social activities such as camping, museum tours, public speaking, and junior life coaching jobs for youth who become part of the Thrive Academy Alumni Association, and then fiscal incentives for participation and for achieving agreed upon milestones. DJS is focused also on rebuilding our continuum of services to meet the needs of justice-involved youth, families, and our communities. During the prior administration, in response to a significant reduction in the population of youth arrested, detained, and committed to out-of-home placement, DJS closed 5 state-operated secure facilities and reduced spending on contracted out-of-home placements. Unfortunately, instead of using the savings to invest and increase the availability and funding for services and supports for the kids in the community, the prior administration returned more than $100 million in saving to the general fund over the last decade. To dig out of that hole, DJS has implemented a 2-pronged approach to enhance the service continuum and meet the diverse needs of our youth and communities. First, in the short term, the department's quickly identifying gaps in the service continuum and mechanisms to fill those gaps. As an example, DJS expanded partnerships with the Boys and Girls Club to serve youth at the front end of the system. Additionally, DJS is working with state and local partners at the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention and the local management boards to align grants and opportunities that fill service gaps. The second prong of the approach is the Community Investment Initiative, which Ms. Miller mentioned. DJS, in partnership with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services and the Department of Human Services, is working to identify the neighborhoods in Maryland with the highest needs and concentration of our shared clients and work together with those communities to provide youth and families services in an innovative and collaborative way. The collaborative CII, Community Investment Initiative, will ensure the department no longer serves youth in isolation, but rather works to help those youth, families, and their communities to be healthier and safer. We're also doing work in our residential facilities to improve treatment programs by launching a new treatment program in 2023 in July. The treatment program uses evidence-based treatment, a form of cognitive behavioral therapy shown to reduce recidivism as its foundational framework. The goal is to teach young people skills to develop healthy ways to cope with stress, regulate their emotions, and improve relationships. You can actually teach them to stop and think before they do something that could harm themselves or others. And that's what cognitive behavioral therapy helps them do. At the same time, DJS partnered with Juvenile Services Education Program, which you all established that began a year and a half ago, to reduce idle time by launching after-school programs. So a lot of kids just sitting around playing spades and watching TV when I first toured the facilities. We also restarted off-grounds outings and trips for eligible youth, launched an employment program with the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of the Environment to provide year-round jobs for youth who've gotten their GED or have graduated. significantly reduced staff vacancy rates in facilities from 18% in January to 8% in December of 23. And I just texted my HR guy and he said it's down to 7% in February. Launched innovation teams to implement cutting-edge reforms in DJS facilities and enhance services, supports, and interventions. Now I'll get to the responses to the issues raised. DJS should comment on how ARPA funds are being used by local governments to support the initiative. We attached a statement of work of the 4 agreements funded through DJS ARPA allocation. 2, DJS should comment on whether a deficiency is required to meet the costs of medical care for youth in fiscal 24. DJS does not require a deficiency to meet the needs of medical care for the kids in fiscal 24. DJS should comment on how it will procure services in fiscal 25, the expected youth participation in fiscal 25, the estimated cost of the program per participant in fiscal 24 and 25, and how the use of the Thrive Academy will be evaluated over time for efficacy and affordability. This is all about Thrive. DJS plans to procure the services for Thrive by issuing an expression of interest to all programs that have a non-residential rate. A non-residential rate is issued by the Interagency Rate Committee, IRC. IRC membership includes representatives from the Department of Budget and Management, Health, Human Services, Juvenile Services, GOCAP, and the Maryland State Department of Education. The IRC is charged with developing and operating a fair, equitable, and predictable rate process for residential child care and child placement agency programs. DJS will work with the Maryland Department of Education, the lead agency for the rate committee, to support credible messenger programs receiving a rate through the IRC. DJS has 3 current agreements for the Thrive Academy, which are estimated to serve a total of 150 youth over the course of FY24. Using that figure, the estimated cost per youth is $10,000. For FY25, the total funding request is $4.35 million. This amount continues the existing funding for the 150 youth and expands the program to an additional 150 youth across the state. The estimated cost per youth based on a budget of $4.35 million, serving 300 youth, is $14,500 per youth. DJS is working with the University of Pennsylvania's Crime and Justice Policy Lab to conduct an evaluation of the Thrive Academy. CJP is recognized as one of the leading researchers of gun violence reduction strategies in the country. The evaluation will assist DJS in assessing the efficacy and affordability of the program. Next question was about enhanced services continuum. DJS should provide a spending plan for this funding enhancement in fiscal 25 and describe the services needed by youth in these populations. DJS will direct funds to support the needs of 3 populations, 3 primary groups. One is youth diverted from prosecution, including children in need of supervisions. DJS will expand services provided at the front end of the system to include interventions and prevention that provides family functioning, behavioral health, educational services, and specific interventions for youth under 12 who possess a gun. The number of SINS complaints increased tenfold over the last fiscal year, due in part to statutory changes enacted by the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, and in part by very aggressive outreach by DJS to educate law enforcement, child serving agencies, parents, and community members about the SINS process. We've now met with law enforcement in every county several times just to explain the SINS process. Every time we do it, the number of SINS referrals goes up. 2, youth diverted from pre-adjudication detention. During the analysis for the Thrive program, DJS identified many youths who do not meet Thrive criteria, but who reoffended during their pretrial period. So kids get released, they get put on electronic monitoring, not much by way of services are ordered because they're pretrial and they haven't been convicted of anything. And often those periods of pretrial being in the community without much by way of services go wrong. So to better support youth in the community, DJS will contract with local services providers to help youth and families navigate the services continuum and to connect them to appropriate programming and support during that pre-adjudication period. 3, youth on community supervision or aftercare. There's a percentage of youth that are at moderate risk for gun violence but don't meet the Thrive criteria. So Thrive's gonna get 20% of the kids on our caseload, 1 out of every 5 kids, but then there's the next 20%. DJS will expand supports and opportunities designed to prevent gun violence and meet the needs of moderate risk youth in partnership with local communities. By working with local communities, DJS will enhance the current services to create a robust continuum of post-adjudication services in each county. Community investment initiatives. The next question is DJS should comment on how it will work with DPSCS and DHS to launch the opportunity networks, how the site locations will be chosen, and how it will procure services. Departments of Public Safety and Correctional Services, Human Services, and Juvenile Services have each identified a staff member leading the work of CII. The agency leads have created an interagency work group and focused their work by identifying a target population to serve. Target population is young people ages 13 to 25 that are on our mutual caseloads and their families who have contact with at least 2 of those 3 agencies. Additionally, the workbook will identify potential CII sites by mapping the zip codes of each agency's target population and layered additional data points, including things like public benefit utilization and poverty rates. CII plans on procuring services by identifying a backbone organization that can grant funds and support grassroots organizations and small to medium-sized nonprofits in those communities. Often those are exactly the kind of programs that are doing a lot of good work in those communities, but they're not getting compensated. They're holding bake sales to do that work, or they're just doing it out of their own pockets. These programs then will reflect the communities themselves, but often they're unable to access government funding because the RFPs are daunting to them. The backbone organization will then operate to support the programs by not only helping be a pass-through, by providing some upfront funds because they can't wait 6 months for the government check to come, and by providing technical assistance, back office support, and data tracking systems. The 2 recommendations, we agree with them both, and we request, of course, that you not withhold the funds. All due respect, Ms. Miller. That's it.
Thank you for the comprehensive response. I know we have some questions from my colleagues. We'll start off with our vice chair, and then we'll move to Delegate Stanko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the work that you've been doing here, your entire team, the transparency, your commitment. Truly, it doesn't go unnoticed.
Thank you.
We've spent some time offline discussing the Thrive program, talking about young people who are more likely to commit gun violence, which is just something that's horrible in our community and our state. And I appreciate your commitment to the issue. It's a data-driven, personalized approach. So many times we see young people branded with a one-size-fit-all approach. So it really is a breath of fresh air to see the work that you've been doing here. You mentioned that it's going to cost $10,000 per kid in the Thrive program. It's just my first question, but how much do we spend a year on a kid if we have to incarcerate them?
Yeah, it ranges. So the cost per bed per year ranges from 400,000 to $1 million. Now the kids don't always stay a year, but if you want to just say how many beds do we have and how much does it cost, it's ranging from about 400,000 per kid or per bed per year to $1 million.
So 10 beds at 400,000 a pop. That's the same amount that this entire program is going to cost.
10 beds? Oh yeah, the whole program.
No,
10
we're
beds
at like,
times
was it $4.5 million?
Yeah, that's right. On the cheap end. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So not only is this the right thing to do, but it's also the fiscally correct thing to do. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay. I really appreciate that. Could you talk to us about your long-term vision for the Thrive program? It's my hope, of course, that we can expand this to every child that falls into this category here. Could you speak a little bit on this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do really want to get the evaluation because no one's done this with this population before. The group violence reduction strategy has been enacted around the country, Richmond, California, Indianapolis, West Baltimore, but it's mostly the police and the community look at the whole population in a location and figure out which people are likely to engage in gun violence, and most of those are going to be adults, like they are in Maryland.
Yep.
And so for most places, it's adults that are the population, and the University of Pennsylvania's research on Baltimore that they just released last week showed good substantial reductions in both shootings and carjackings in West Baltimore, and further, they noted that it did not displace that violence to the neighboring precincts. So that's really good. So what I'd like to do is do this with that 20%. At the same time, I want to start meeting with key stakeholders, the judges, the prosecutors, the police, the communities, to figure out, what should we do with the next group? They might not need quite as expensive a program or quite as intense a program, but they're not going to need nothing. That's for sure. And so I'd like to ensconce Thrive as something that keeps going, but then sort of have maybe an attenuated program for the next 20%. I think our top 40% of most risky kids drive our numbers. I'm not saying you shouldn't do anything for the front end kids that are getting in trouble, and a lot of frustrated parents out there that need help, but they're not going to need $14,000 worth of services. They might need a boys club or something like that. So what I want to do is just keep evaluating it, start the planning for the next 20%, and then enhance the upfront services for the kids coming in the front end that are less risky, maybe property offenses, maybe they're young, and then just keep evaluating and coming back to you and telling you the truth, and then we go from there.
Awesome. So it's either $10,000 a kid or it's $400,000.
That's right.
Correct?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem. Delegate Stanco.
Thank you, Chair Lewis, and thank you, Secretary Schiraldi, for being here today. I guess I'll preface this. I've got a bunch of questions. Make every attempt for this not to be a partisan framework. I think it's important to note that these questions are bipartisan. And I think a place we can start is, can you describe the oversight process of the juvenile justice centers and your personal involvement in them, in that oversight?
Yeah, there's you mean the Attorney General's Juvenile Justice Monitoring Unit? Is that what you're asking about?
Like at the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center, the juvenile detention centers.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways we have oversight for the facilities. One is the Attorney General's office has a juvenile justice monitoring unit that's required by statute to monitor all of our facilities, the detention facilities and the placement facilities in the state, and to issue reports quarterly, which they do. We also have an internal inspection report, an Office of Inspector General that does our own separate analyses of those facilities. Sometimes it focuses on specific issues like education or mental health or recreation, and sometimes it's just general. I am personally involved in every one of those. When those reports come out, I sit in a room and we have on our on screen each superintendent for every facility, and we go over the reports. We come up with work plans to address the issues that are raised, and then I hold those people accountable for addressing those issues.
So can you help me understand, or help us understand, why it required a public letter admonishing DJS from the Senate President, the House Judiciary Chairman, Delegates Edelson from this committee, and Delegate Lewis, along with Baltimore City Councilman Cohen, for your office to recognize that the intake director at Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center was not following state law and releasing children within just not following state law and releasing children effectively immediately after being arrested?
We had already identified issues around our intake in the Baltimore Juvenile Justice Center prior to the letter, and I communicated that to President Ferguson, who was the lead author of that letter, and had begun looking at the problems with intake that we inherited, some of which were communication with Baltimore Police Department. And we are now working with Commissioner Worley, the state's attorney's office, the public defender's office, and the bench to address all of those issues. And we inherited some staff that weren't particularly good, and I made my staffing decisions.
My concern is that things had gotten so bad, and your job is to oversee, enforce the state laws that are on the books. Things got so bad that it required legislators and the most important legislators in the state to publicly call out the DJS in order to solve a problem. And again, not a partisan issue. This is a big challenge. My concern, I guess maybe kind of stepping into it, is my concern is that from a cultural perspective, transparently, you have a habit of allowing your personal views to impact how you follow procedural frameworks. And specifically, that was found by the Inspector General in Washington, D.C. when you were leading DYRS, that you did not follow proper procedure when you took the children to your home. And then culturally, it was the Inspector General found that was fundamentally built through the DYRS based on the way that you manage the organization. And so for me, as I see this, my concern is that it is not a one-off or a blame on a prior administration, but culturally, your team members and your executives and those that report to your executives feel that you're empowering them to make up or to expand upon the laws that are on the books and follow and do those things as they feel, or they feel that you would prefer rather than what the laws actually say.
Yeah, no, I could definitely understand why, based on the media accounts, you might draw that line from one place to the other to an incident that occurred 16 years ago, to perhaps believe that I'm establishing a culture of ignoring the policies. That having been said, as I said earlier, we already began to identify, and we're meeting with all the key stakeholders around problems at intake. And we've been fixing those problems, and we've been making personnel actions and personnel decisions that address those actions. So I think those facts belie such a conclusion, but we're all going to draw our own conclusions based on what we read.
I appreciate your answer, and we could agree to disagree, but I think the framework of why I think about culture in this way is, again, agreement from the Senate president in this case, which is, and I know he's looking at changing, I guess, increasing the law requirements. I know you've been on the record publicly, you're against sex registries, if I'm, as far as what I saw when you were a Columbia fellow. And so speaking to the issues with regards to, and I know you can't speak to an individual case, I understand that. So I'm going to speak to the Patterson High School issue where there's a 15-year-old that publicly and based on the victim's mother, a 15-year-old that is in Patterson High School that has pled guilty to second-degree rape of a 3-year-old. And then there was a pending charges in September when this all happened, or after this happened, for a 2-year-old, the same thing for a 2-year-old. With the same offender. And as my understanding is in this case that that the Department of Juvenile Services recommended probation, community service, and counseling. And it's important to note that our state law mandates in Article 11-704.1b states that a person shall be included in registry of juvenile sex offenders that is maintained by the department separately from the sex offenders registry. Specifically if that individual is over the age of 14. So what I'm interested to know is, broadly speaking, why would the Department of Juvenile Services ever recommend, or would the Department of Juvenile Services ever recommend in the case of child rape for that individual to not be put on the sex offenders list?
My understanding is that you're not supposed to be on the sex offender list until you complete probation, until you're done with probation. Also, informing schools upon arrest for sex offenses is the obligation of police departments. Upon conviction, it's the obligation of state's attorney's offices. There are lots of problems with my department that I'm trying to fix. Some of the media just assumes that if anything goes wrong in juvenile justice, it's the juvenile services department's issue. Sometimes it is, but many times it's not.
So I just want to clarify. So you're saying that this was the responsibility of the state's attorney to inform, or it would be the responsibility of the state's attorney to inform the school if an individual was convicted or pled guilty of those charges?
police upon arrest, state's attorneys upon conviction.
All right, bring it in.
Yeah,
close.
thank you. Yeah, I thank you for your latitude and appreciate your time.
No worries. Delegate McComas. Also, I just, for the record, I just hope that the tone and tenor should not make any type of personal attacks against any of our witnesses here. Let's keep it to the issues. I'm not suggesting that you did, but I'm just saying, we have a certain decorum our speaker likes to maintain both on the floor and in our committees, okay? Yep. Delegate McComas.
Secretary Schiraldi, I have a question. I've been around a while because I got gray hair like you got. It seems to me that I know Maryland through the years has always been struggling with juvenile services and juvenile justice. And I know a couple of the folks went to Missouri at one time, and this was like 21 years ago. I didn't go, but they all were very hot on the Missouri plan. I guess the one thing that I kind of walk away from it, and just with your response regarding who's to notify whom, depending on if it's an arrest versus it's a guilty plea or found guilty, is that everybody's so darn siloed. And to my mind, you know, even with the police officers, if they want, they could use a petition for child in need of assistance. But the thing is, they don't want to do that because that means more paperwork. And, you know, the more paperwork, the less on the street. So what is your agency contemplating now or in the future to try to mediate some of that silo?
Yeah, so I think that a great question. I think that there was a legitimate misunderstanding after the juvenile justice reform law passed. And when we went around to law enforcement in every county, I honestly think the police didn't know how to file a cens petition, didn't know they could, didn't know families could. You don't have to be a police officer to file a cens petition. Family members can, schools can. And so once we explained it to them, the number of cens petitions exploded. I mean, it went up tenfold. It's still pretty low. My bet is that there are some counties that still don't get it, but we're going to go every quarter. And we talk to the presidents of both the Chiefs Association and the Sheriff's Association to start to advertise and, you know, sort of publicize some of the approaches to filing cens petitions in their newsletters. So we're trying to, you know, get the information out as much as we can. I don't think it was resistance, and I'm not sure it was paperwork. Maybe it is, you know, police have busy lives, but I think that a lot of it was just they had no idea how to do it. And really, it can be just a phone call. And then our procedure is we meet with the kid, we meet with the family, and we make a decision and we start to provide them services.
Yeah, thank you. Make sure you just press the button so that those who are watching on screen can hear and see.
Follow-up. What do you suggest that the different groups that deal with these types of issues could do to improve so that there's more of communication and not just, you know, I did my part, but they don't. I mean, because we see it in a lot of different agencies, you know, just the silo. And I know that a lot of the agent or groups or different, like the SCAN, the State Council on Child Abuse and Neglect. Everybody's so darn siloed, and you know, everybody talks about it. Everybody says we're gonna do away, you know, kind of trying to eliminate the stovepiping, but it seems to go on endlessly.
Yeah,
So do you have any idea what can be done?
Yeah, I have to say, I think that what happened with the Juvenile Justice Reform Council was actually a really good model. You had senators and delegates from both sides of the aisle. You had law enforcement, you had prosecutors, state's attorneys, defense bar, community advocates, and researchers. They got data for several years. They discussed the issues. They all were going back to their, you know, sort of trade associations, state attorneys, trade association of law enforcement, to get their feedback on it. And they came up with a set of recommendations. I don't think that's a bad process. And I know that something like that is being proposed in that big bill that Delegate Klippinger and Senator Smith are authoring right now, to sort of let's bring us all back to the table in a way that we were under that council. That council stopped. I think the next part of that could have been and should have been an implementation plan, so that by the time I arrived, the frustration was at a boiling point. I mean, just 6 months later, because the police felt like an 11-year-old does X and there's nothing we can do. And that's why I'm saying no sins petitions were being filed. And a lot of law enforcement were angry about that. So I think that it would have been better if we started the education the day after that legislation passed, rather than, but when I got here in January. But so that's what I'd say. I think we all need to be together around the table. We need to work these issues out. There's a lot more compromise. When I meet with state's attorneys, we agree on way more than we disagree on, but all we ever talk about is what we disagree on. So we gotta get back to where we were once before, which I think we can do.
So first, Secretary Schiraldi, I appreciate you all being here, and as anyone who's both here or watching online can tell, one thing I really enjoy about this subcommittee is that we address a lot of the issues that touch people's hearts, and generates needed passion. And I appreciate the candor that everyone brings to that, and keeping everything respectful, as my colleagues do. These are complex matters. You guys are the Department of Juvenile Services, but everything that deals with juveniles doesn't necessarily come before you. Police departments are involved, state's attorneys are involved, the school systems are involved, Department of Human Services, depending if it's that, many people's hands are in this pot. But as a state, we have the responsibility of making sure the best interests of these children are adhered. So I have just a couple questions and thoughts. First was on the education point in response to the bills that we already passed. I really appreciate that the quarterly outreach that you referenced. I really think that we need to continue to kick up that education so that law enforcement knows they have agency on what to do with the youth that they encounter. I don't know if you specifically said it, but if there could be communication with our school systems too.
Yep.
So that it's just more broader. It's not all in our police departments either. I was interested in essentially Thrive and how it's going to be researched. Normally in these things, you come from the academia world, is there going to be like a control group of sort that is compared to? Like, how is that going to work to show the impact? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It's going to be, we haven't gotten them to full funding. We're asking for a couple of foundations, but what they've told us so far is that it'll be pre-post. What would you have predicted this group of kids would have done based on what similar groups of kids did in the past? And now what did they do? And there's always going to be a kid that's just below the line that didn't come into Thrive or didn't come into it because they were in a different county or for a bunch of other reasons. They'll compare the Thrive kids to those kids with similar demographics, prior record, current offense, things like that.
Got it. So if you're in that 20%, but you're not at a county where the program is going on yet, that might be the comparison until it expands. I understand that. I know there's been some concerns, particularly among my colleagues in the Baltimore City delegation, around the Maryland Youth Residence renovation and expansion. This is more of a comment, just encourage continue dialogue with the elected representatives there to make sure that wherever that facility ends up is something that the communities and the people that represent them are supportive of. I wanted to know if you can give us a sketch. Obviously, we've talked about Thrive, but beyond that, if you can give us a sketch of some of the other programs that young people who go through DJS have access to, and the success rate of those programs and connecting these youths to where we would like them to go.
Great. So there's several in-home family service models that the department uses that are evidence-based: functional family therapy, multisystemic therapy. They've got good evaluations nationally in high quality research. And so young people really kind of at the front end or even at the middle end can get those kinds of programs. And they basically work with the kid and their family to resolve the issues that are kind of drawing the kid into recidivism and delinquency. We also have several good, strong mentoring programs, but I don't want you to think of it like Boys Club mentoring. These are programs that see kids very frequently and try to move them in a direction that keeps them away from crime. ROCA is one example. YAP, the Youth Advocate Program, and the Troyes program from the University of Maryland are all good examples of that. Then, inside the facility, we have cognitive behavioral therapy now that every kid who's placed with us gets, and that's been, again, studied in some very good, rigorous research. The recidivism rates for kids coming out of our facilities is 84%. And as Ms. Miller has mentioned, it's been declining. It's been getting better all the time. Kids on probation, it's 89% are not recidivating. This is do not have a new adjudication or conviction within a year. And then the kids on diversion are 92.4% are not getting a new adjudication within a year. So that's not the individual recidivism rates for each program. I can get you those. I don't have them on the top of my head. But overall, the numbers are moving in the right direction. And 8 or 9 out of 10 kids are not getting reconvicted.
That's great. That's great news. I mean, from what you just shared, it also, correct me from what I heard, a lot of the program is based on in the home, which means I guess it's coming to the youth to wherever they are.
Correct.
Or it's provided in the facility where they also are being housed at. Do any of the programs currently require the youth to transport themselves anywhere? And do you all currently have allowable funds to help subsidize that transportation for the youth?
We don't typically transport youths to our offices or to community-based programs. I mentioned in my testimony that we are allowing kids who have graduated to go out to work when they're in the facilities, if they're behaving and if they've reached a certain level. And those kids we are taking, and staff is with them. So when the kids go to the Department of Environment or Department of Natural Resources from Greenridge, Backbone, and Victor Cullen, most of which, are all in Western Maryland, and many of them are in parks.
Mm-hmm.
So we take them there because they obviously couldn't get there themselves from a correctional facility. Also, we do have a couple kids in college from those correctional facilities. We also take them there.
So in the policy committee, not here, we focused on the money. I know we're reviewing some changes to our juvenile statute that will require essentially juveniles showing up for probationary hearings and things of that nature. I would encourage some thought about some flexibility, and maybe we can continue to talk offline about transportation money. I would hate for some of these kids who are doing great. They've gone through your program. They're not likely to reoffend, but to end up caught back in the system just because they can't make a probationary hearing of some sort.
Absolutely.
If that is the only challenge for them, I would like us to hopefully find some type of minimal way to get them the resources to keep them out of trouble and out of the state's hands.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yep. Any further questions, colleagues? Well, thank you guys so much for your hard work. I know we're going to continue to be in conversation, and we appreciate you being here. We do have some testimonies for some other witnesses, so you're off the hook for the moment, Secretary and your team. But we will bring up Wendy Wilcox from the Bowie Youth Service Bureau, Ann Seacock from Maryland Association of Youth Service Bureaus, Shakira Johnson from AFSCME, and Crystal Clear Cummings from AFSCME as well. And whoever wants to begin, make sure to state your name for the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and subcommittee members. I'm Wendy Wilcox, and I am the Vice Chair of the Maryland Association of Youth Service Bureaus, and I'm also the Director of Bowie Youth and Family Services. And we're here to talk about the potential increase in funding for youth service bureaus as part of filling the service gaps that exist for youth. And so I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. First of all, we are well established and trusted in our communities. We have been Personally, Bowie Youth and Family Services has been in operation since 1971. Other youth service bureaus are a little newer and are maybe only 40 years old, but we're well recognized as a resource in our communities and a source for assistance when kids need intervention. We are effective. Our primary service is mental health services. And with the folks that get mental health services for them and their families, we are 95% successful in enabling those youth not to be connected to the juvenile justice system if they aren't already. And 80% of our graduates, the folks that complete services with us, show success based on efficacy measures. And we also use cutting edge methods. Even though we're old, we update our skills all the time. And all of our therapists are licensed and they use techniques such as cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, and TFCBT for trauma, BSFT, brief strategic family therapy, and other kinds of family therapy. So we're very successful in helping kids deal with systemic issues in their families and communities, and also with issues like trauma and mood disorders like anxiety and depression and other issues. All of us are also responsive to our communities. So all of us collaborate with schools and other agencies to deliver the services that are most needed. We once had youth service bureaus that are no longer in existence in Baltimore. Those youth service bureau employees used to go to court when parents wouldn't take home their kids and work with those situations so that those kids had a safe place to go and didn't go to lockup. Carroll County has diversion programs, and also Tri-County Youth Service Bureaus works with Department of Juvenile Services at the local level to help kids who have been caught up with the juvenile justice system. My own
Ms.
agency.
Wilcox, thank you. We're gonna
Sorry.
bring it together. Sorry, I forgot to say at the outset,
2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Can I say, we mentor 50 kids a week all year around in Bowie and provide other services as well. And then, thank you.
Thank you. No
Back to
worries.
Ann.
And colleagues,
Thank you.
if there are any questions, we'll wait until the panel is finished.
Appreciate
You
it.
can begin. Ms. Seacott, are you ready?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm very happy to be here. Ann Seacott on behalf of the Maryland Association of Youth Service Bureaus. And I'm here just to give you a reason why we are talking about funding for the bureaus. At its peak, the youth service bureaus in Maryland were funded at $2.4 million. There were 19 bureaus across the state. One of the ways that we used to be able to ensure funding was by earmarking a part of the funding line item through the Governor's Office for Children. They administered the Children's Interagency Fund. And so that was a number of years how we were able to make sure that there was funding for the youth service bureaus. Unfortunately, that all came to pretty much a screeching halt. There was leadership under the last administration of the Governor's Office for Children that made lots of changes related to the things that could get funded, how the funding application happened. The other thing that happened is, as with other things in the budget, money that was earmarked through budget language just wasn't spent. So it was as if we were cutting the budget when we got an earmark. So we stopped doing that. We're now down to 7 bureaus from 19. 5 of which are in Prince George's County, and that's mostly thankfully because of the support from the municipalities that they're attached to, like Bowie. YSBs are an important, youth service bureaus are an important part of the work the state is doing to support our children. That 95% success rate is the data that DJS collects every 2 years to see the efficacy of these services. And what we're looking for is support for DJS's budget and a lot of the work they're doing to look at what the service gaps are that the secretary mentioned, and where where youth service bureaus can plug in, can expand services, and maybe even reopen some of those youth service bureaus that had to close. So with that, we ask for the support for the agency's budget.
Thank you. You can begin when you're ready. Is Ms. Johnson?
I'm Crystal Clear Cummings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, House of Delegates. I have worked for the Department of Juvenile Services for 20 years in a capacity of an educator in detention and a case manager in detention. I am currently in centralized Baltimore City intake. We are dealing with a very high rate of vacancy, staff shortage. Those who remain are used and given directives because I say so, to do a myriad of jobs, 2 or more jobs, full job descriptions. We are not machines. We are living, breathing, committed employee stakeholders who made a cognizant decision to work with at-risk youth. I was called before I walked in here to do overtime because we're short. This will be a 16-hour day for me. We are overwhelmed by overtime. We're guided by the management that do not meet the criteria of managers, but on the criteria of the Homeboy Network system. DJS wants to fulfill our message, our mission, to transform lives, to provide pathways to success, to recognize needs, educate, train, deliver services, support, and opportunities to promote positive growth and positive development, forge significant relationships. I am just asking, please support us. Please support its workers so that we can support the youth, please. Thank you for your ear. Have a good day.
Ms. Cummings, thank you for your testimony. I don't know how long it took you to get here, but we appreciate it, and that's the type of stuff we need to be hearing. And know that not just in my role as a subcommittee chair or this subcommittee, but the full committee, we are with you guys. There's no way we can serve the public without the folks who are in the front line doing it every day, and we mean that. It seems Delegate Stanko, I think, has a comment or question, and I'll let him start.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just really briefly, really appreciate just echoing the chair's comments, you coming here. I know that's not easy to give your true, raw, honest experience. And as the chair said, it's really important that we hear that, and just thank you. And just want to add that in to echo the chair.
Any other questions or comments, colleagues? Seeing none, thank you guys so much for your testimony. The Bowie Youth Service Bureau, I'm probably going to follow up with you offline. But for everyone else, we are adjourned. Have a great day.
Thank you. Yeah.